I'm Sarah, and 8 months ago, my husband Michael stood in our marble-floored kitchen in Westlake Hills and told me he couldn't stay married to a woman who would never give him children. Today, I'm 4 months pregnant, and the father isn't Michael. It's his brother David. And when Michael finds out, his perfectly constructed world is going to crumble in ways he never imagined. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Let me take you back to where this all began. My name is Sarah Mitchell, though I suppose it's Sarah Williams again now. For 3 years, I was the perfect wife to Michael Mitchell, and for 3 years, I believed our inability to conceive was entirely my fault. I was 28 when our marriage ended, standing in that same kitchen where I'd cooked countless dinners, hosted dinner parties for his colleagues, and cried silent tears over negative pregnancy tests month after month. I remember the exact moment everything changed. It was a Tuesday morning in March, and Austin was experiencing one of those perfect spring days that make you remember why people fall in love with Texas. The live oak trees in our yard were just beginning to bud, and the morning light streamed through our floor-to-ceiling windows, casting everything in a golden glow. I was grading spelling tests at the kitchen island, my red pen moving methodically across 8-year-old handwriting, when Michael walked in dressed in his charcoal suit, the one that made his eyes look almost green instead of their usual brown. He poured himself coffee from the machine I'd programmed to start at 6:30 every morning for the past 3 years. Black, no sugar, exactly how his mother Patricia had taught him to drink it when he was 12. Everything about Michael was precise, calculated, learned from someone else's expectations of what he should be. "Sarah, we need to talk," he said, and something in his tone made my pen stop moving across little Jenny Morrison's test paper. She'd spelled because as because, and I'd been about to mark it wrong, but suddenly that seemed insignificant. I looked up at my husband, really looked at him, and noticed things I'd been too busy being the perfect wife to see. The way his jaw was set with determination. The way he couldn't quite meet my eyes. The way his wedding ring caught the light as he gripped his coffee mug just a little too tightly. "What about?" I asked, though something deep in my stomach already knew. Michael set down his mug and straightened his tie, a nervous habit he'd never quite shaken from his college debate team days. "I've been thinking about our situation, and I've made a decision." Our situation, that's what he called it. 3 years of negative pregnancy tests, fertility consultations, tracking ovulation, taking supplements, adjusting diets, and scheduling our most intimate moments around my cycle. 3 years of his mother Patricia dropping hints about grandchildren and asking pointed questions about our progress. 3 years of watching his face fall just slightly every time I shook my head when he looked at me hopefully on the days my period was due. "I can't do this anymore, Sarah. I want children. I've always wanted children. My family expects children, and you can't give them to me." The words hit me like cold water. I set down my pen carefully, buying myself a moment to process what he was saying. "Michael, we've only been trying for 3 years. Lots of couples take longer. Dr. Martinez said there are still options we haven't explored." He shook his head, and I saw something in his expression that I'd never seen before. Not sadness or frustration, but resignation mixed with something that looked almost like relief. "I've thought about this carefully, and I've made up my mind. I'm filing for divorce." The kitchen fell silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of our neighbor starting his lawnmower. I stared at this man I'd loved since I was 22, this man whose children I'd dreamed of, whose future I'd planned mine around, and realized I was looking at a stranger. "You're divorcing me because I can't get pregnant?" My voice sounded smaller than I intended, and I hated that weakness, but I couldn't hide it. "I'm divorcing you because we want different things," he said, already retreating into the careful language he used at work, the kind of corporate speak that said nothing while sounding reasonable. "I want a family. Traditional values. Legacy. You want to keep trying treatments that aren't working and may never work." I stood up from the bar stool, my legs feeling unsteady. "I want those things too, Michael. I want them with you," we said in sickness and in health. "This isn't sickness, Sarah. This is biology. And biology doesn't lie." The way he said it, so final and clinical, made something crack inside my chest. I'd spent 3 years blaming myself, changing my diet, reducing stress, taking every supplement, following every piece of advice from fertility websites and well-meaning friends. I'd endured Patricia's pointed comments about how her friend's daughter was already pregnant with her second child after being married only 2 years. I'd smiled through baby showers and christenings and family gatherings where the question hung in the air unspoken but ever present. "Have you already talked to a lawyer?" I asked, because somehow I knew the answer. "James Sullivan is handling everything. He says if we keep it simple and uncontested, we can be done in 60 days. 60 days. He'd reduced our 3-year marriage to a 60-day administrative process. I looked around our kitchen, at the coffee maker I'd programmed every night, at the breakfast bar where we'd eaten hurried meals before work, at the window above the sink where I'd stood washing dishes and dreaming about a little girl with Michael's eyes helping me bake cookies for Christmas. "What about the house?" I asked. "I'll keep it. It's been in my family's name since we bought it. You can take your personal things, obviously. And I'll make sure you're taken care of financially in the short term." Taken care of? Like I was a pet he was rehoming. "This is really what you want?" I asked one more time, giving him a chance to take it back, to remember the woman he'd proposed to in the botanical gardens, the woman who'd worn his grandmother's ring and promised to build a life with him. "It's what needs to happen," he said, and there was that corporate speak again. "We both deserve to be happy, Sarah, and we can't be happy together." I nodded slowly, feeling something inside me shifting and hardening. Okay. He looked surprised, like he'd expected more of a fight. Maybe tears or pleading or bargaining. But I'd used up all my tears over the past 3 years, crying quietly in bathroom stalls at work when another colleague announced a pregnancy, crying in the shower after yet another negative test, crying into my pillow when Michael fell asleep frustrated after another perfectly timed, completely unromantic attempt at conception. "Okay," I repeated. "I'll pack my things." That afternoon, while Michael was at work, I walked through our house taking mental photographs. The living room, where we'd hosted his colleagues for dinner parties. Me smiling and playing the perfect wife while they talked about market strategies and quarterly reports. The master bedroom, where we'd tried so desperately to create life that we'd almost forgotten how to create love. The guest room that I'd secretly imagined painting yellow or pale green. The room that would have been a nursery. I packed methodically, taking only what was truly mine. My books, my clothes, my grandmother's jewelry, the few pieces of art I'd brought to the marriage. I left behind the kitchen appliances we'd received as wedding gifts, the expensive sheets his mother had insisted we needed, the decorative pillows I'd bought to make the house feel like home. Let him keep it all. Let him fill it with someone else's dreams. Emma Rodriguez, my college roommate and closest friend, helped me move my boxes into a downtown loft in the Arts District that I'd found online the same day. It was smaller than my walk-in closet had been in Westlake Hills, but the exposed brick walls and large windows made it feel honest in a way the perfectly appointed house never had. "Are you sure you're okay?" Emma asked as we hauled the last box up 2 flights of stairs. She was in her scrubs, having come straight from her shift at the hospital, her dark hair pulled back in the messy bun that had been her signature look since nursing school. "I'm fine," I said, though I wasn't sure if that was true. I felt hollow and raw and strangely relieved all at the same time. "He's an idiot," she said bluntly, the way only your oldest friend can. "You know that, right? Marriage isn't a business transaction. You don't just cut your losses when the quarterly reports aren't meeting expectations." I smiled at her medical business metaphor mix. Emma had always been practical, which is probably why she'd gone into nursing while I'd chosen teaching. We balanced each other out that way. "Maybe he's right, though," I said, sitting on my new couch, a secondhand piece I'd bought from a young couple moving to California. "Maybe we do want different things. What you wanted was to build a family with the man you loved. What he wanted was a guaranteed baby-making machine. Those aren't the same thing." Emma had never particularly liked Michael, though she'd been too polite to say so while we were married. She'd always said he was too concerned with what other people thought, too focused on checking boxes rather than actually living life. I defended him then, but sitting in my empty loft with my marriage dissolved around me, I was starting to think she might have been right. The divorce proceeded exactly as Michael had predicted. 60 days of paperwork and lawyer meetings, and dividing up the remains of our shared life. I signed everything James Sullivan put in front of me, taking the modest settlement Michael offered and agreeing to his terms. I just wanted it over. The final hearing was on a Wednesday in May. I wore a navy dress that I'd bought for a job interview 2 years earlier. Something professional and forgettable. Michael wore his best suit and sat across the courtroom looking like he was attending a business meeting, rather than the legal termination of his marriage. When the judge declared us officially divorced, I felt nothing. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Not sadness or relief or anger, just a strange emptiness. Like I'd been holding my breath for so long that I'd forgotten how to breathe normally. Outside the courthouse, Michael approached me one last time. "Sarah, I hope you understand this isn't personal. I really do want you to be happy." I looked at him standing there in the Texas sunshine, so certain of his choices, so comfortable with his decision to discard 3 years of marriage because it hadn't produced the results he wanted. "I hope you get everything you're looking for, Michael." He nodded, satisfied that we were ending things civilly, and walked away toward his BMW. I watched him drive off and realized that I felt sorry for him. Sorry for a man who could only see life as a series of goals to achieve rather than experiences to treasure. Sorry for a man who would never understand that love isn't a contract with guaranteed deliverables. I drove back to my loft and started building a new life. I threw myself into teaching with renewed energy, finding joy in my third grader's enthusiasm and creativity. I took up painting again, something I'd abandoned when Michael and I got engaged because he'd said it was impractical. I started reading fiction again, staying up late with novels that had nothing to do with fertility or relationships, or any of the self-help books that had cluttered my nightstand for 3 years. Slowly, I remembered who Sarah Williams had been before she became Sarah Mitchell. I remembered that I liked dancing badly to music while cooking dinner. I remembered that I enjoyed hiking the trails around Austin, even when I had no one to share the views with. I remembered that I was funny and smart and capable of more than just being someone's wife. It was during this period of rediscovering myself that David came back into my life. Michael's younger brother had always been different from the rest of the Mitchell family. Where Michael was rigid and goal-oriented, David was spontaneous and creative. Where Michael dressed in suits and drove a luxury sedan, David wore jeans and drove a beat-up pickup truck with camera equipment scattered in the back. David was a travel photographer, gone more often than he was home, which had probably saved him from becoming as uptight as the rest of his family. He had the same brown hair as Michael, but longer and less perfectly styled. The same general bone structure but softer somehow, laugh lines around his eyes, instead of the permanent furrow of concentration that Michael wore, like a badge of responsibility. I'd always liked David, though we'd never spent much time together. At family gatherings, he was usually behind a camera, documenting Patricia's elaborate dinner parties and holiday celebrations for the family albums she meticulously maintained. He'd been kind to me in a casual way, but always respectful of my marriage to his brother. The first time I saw him after the divorce was at Common Grounds, the coffee shop near my loft that had become my regular morning stop before work. I was grading papers at my usual table by the window when someone slid into the chair across from me. "Sarah?" I looked up to find David studying me with concern. He was wearing a green flannel shirt that brought out the hazel flecks in his brown eyes, and his hair was longer than I remembered, curling slightly at the collar. "David." "Hi." I set down my pen, suddenly self-conscious about the stack of math worksheets covered in red corrections. "I heard about the divorce. I'm sorry." There was something different about the way he said it compared to the polite condolences I'd been receiving from mutual friends and acquaintances. He sounded genuinely sorry, not just socially appropriate. "Thank you. It's probably for the best." He studied my face for a moment, and I had the unsettling feeling that he was seeing more than I intended to show. "Is it?" The question caught me off guard. Most people accepted the standard responses about mutual decisions and wanting different things. David seemed to be asking what I actually felt about it. I think so, I said honestly. We weren't making each other happy anymore. Michael's an idiot, David said bluntly, echoing Emma's assessment. I couldn't help smiling at that. You're his brother, which means I've known him longer than anyone and I know exactly how idiotic he can be. David leaned back in his chair, completely relaxed in a way that Michael never was. He always has to have everything planned out, every detail controlled. He can't just let life happen. Some people like structure, I said, though I wasn't sure why I was defending Michael. Some people are so busy trying to control the outcome that they miss the entire experience. David's eyes met mine across the small table. Photography taught me that. You can plan the perfect shot, set up all your equipment, wait for the ideal lighting, and then the most beautiful moment happens when you're not even looking through the lens. There was something about the way he said it that made me think he wasn't just talking about photography. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the bustle of the coffee shop continuing around us. "What are you working on?" he asked, nodding toward my papers. "Third grade math. We're learning multiplication, and it's not going well for everyone." I was terrible at math, David said with a grin. Still am. I can calculate f-stops and shutter speeds, but ask me to figure out a tip and I'm hopeless. It's not about being good at math, I said, falling into my teacher voice without thinking. It's about understanding that there are different ways to solve problems. Some kids need to visualize it, some need to use manipulatives, some need to hear it explained differently. Sounds like you're a good teacher. I love it, I said, and realized how true that was. I love watching kids figure things out, seeing that moment when something clicks and they get excited about learning. David smiled, and it transformed his whole face. Michael never talked about your teaching like that. Michael thought I should quit and focus on getting pregnant, I said, then immediately regretted sharing something so personal. David's expression darkened slightly. Of course he did. Before I could ask what he meant by that, David's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and sighed. I have to go. Client meeting about a wedding shoot this weekend. He stood up, then hesitated. Sarah, would you like to have dinner sometime? As friends, he added quickly. I know this is probably complicated because of Michael, but I'd like to catch up properly. I looked up at him, this man who'd always been on the periphery of my life, and felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time. Curiosity about another person, genuine interest in getting to know someone better. I'd like that, I said. We exchanged numbers, and I watched him walk out of the coffee shop, noting the easy way he moved, unhurried and comfortable in his own skin. It struck me that I'd never seen Michael walk like that. Michael moved with purpose, always heading toward a specific goal. David moved like someone who enjoyed the journey as much as the destination. That evening, I sat in my loft thinking about our conversation. There had been something refreshing about talking to someone who didn't seem to be evaluating me against a checklist of wife qualifications. David had asked about my teaching like it mattered, like it was interesting, rather than just a job I happened to have while failing at my primary role of producing grandchildren for Patricia Mitchell. 3 days later, David texted me about dinner. We met at a small Italian place in South Austin, the kind of neighborhood restaurant that Michael would have dismissed as too casual for a proper date. But this wasn't a date, I reminded myself. This was dinner between friends, former in-laws navigating the awkward social territory of post-divorce relationships. David arrived wearing jeans and a blue button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, carrying a worn leather messenger bag that looked like it had traveled the world with him. He hugged me hello, a quick, friendly gesture that somehow managed to be both casual and warm. "This place okay?" he asked as we waited to be seated. "I know it's not exactly Westlake Hills fine dining." "It's perfect," I said, and meant it. The restaurant was tiny and crowded, with checkered tablecloths and wine bottles serving as candle holders. It felt real in a way that the upscale restaurants Michael preferred never did. Over pasta and wine, David told me about his work. He specialized in travel and wedding photography, which meant he spent half his time documenting other people's adventures and the other half capturing their most important moments. He'd just returned from a month in Iceland, shooting the northern lights for a travel magazine. "Show me," I said, genuinely interested. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through images that took my breath away. Sweeping landscapes painted in impossible colors, intimate moments between couples who looked genuinely happy, children playing in environments that looked like fairy tales. "These are incredible," I said, studying a photo of an elderly couple dancing at what appeared to be their anniversary party. Something about the way David had captured them made you believe in love that lasted, love that grew deeper rather than more complicated over time. "Thank you. I love what I do. Even when it means living out of hotels and eating too many airport sandwiches. Do you ever want to settle down?" I asked, then immediately felt awkward for asking such a personal question. David considered this seriously, the way he seemed to consider everything. I used to think settling down meant giving up adventure. Now I think maybe it just means finding someone who wants to have adventures with you. There was something in the way he said it that made me look up from his phone to find him watching me. Not evaluating or judging, just observing with the same careful attention he probably gave to his photography subjects. "What about you?" he asked. "What do you want now that you get to decide for yourself?" It was such a simple question, but it stopped me cold. For the past 3 years, everything I'd wanted had been filtered through what Michael wanted, what Patricia expected, what would make our marriage successful. I'd wanted to get pregnant because Michael wanted children. I'd wanted to host perfect dinner parties because that's what wives in his social circle did. I'd wanted to be the woman Michael had married because I'd thought that was what love required. "I don't know," I admitted. "I'm still figuring that out." "That's okay," David said gently. "You have time." We talked until the restaurant started stacking chairs around us, covering everything from my childhood in small-town Texas to his travels around the world. David had a way of asking questions that made me think, really think, about things I'd never examined closely before. When he walked me to my car, I felt more like myself than I had in years. Not Sarah the failed wife or Sarah the divorced woman, just Sarah. A person with thoughts and dreams and opinions that mattered. "I had a really good time tonight," I said as we reached my car. "So did I." David leaned against the parking meter, hands in his pockets. "Would you like to do it again sometime?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. He smiled that transformative smile again. "Good. I'll call you." As I drove home through the Austin night, windows down and music playing, I found myself humming along to songs on the radio. When was the last time I'd done that? When was the last time I'd felt hopeful about the future, rather than anxious about meeting expectations? Over the next few weeks, David and I fell into an easy friendship. We met for coffee when he was in town, went to art galleries and music festivals, took long walks around Lady Bird Lake talking about everything and nothing. He told me stories about the places he'd been and the people he'd met. I told him about my students and my rediscovered love of painting and the books I was reading. Slowly, something shifted between us. The casual touches lasted a little longer. The conversations grew more personal. The way he looked at me changed from friendly interest to something deeper and more complicated. I tried to ignore it at first. David was Michael's brother, and no matter how badly my marriage had ended, there were lines that probably shouldn't be crossed. But David made me laugh in ways I'd forgotten I could laugh. He listened to me talk about teaching like it was the most fascinating subject in the world. He brought me small gifts from his travels. Not expensive jewelry or flowers, but interesting stones and pressed leaves and photographs he'd taken of things that had reminded him of me. One evening in late summer, we were walking around Zilker Park after an outdoor concert when a sudden thunderstorm caught us without umbrellas. We ran for shelter under a pavilion, arriving breathless and soaked and laughing at our complete lack of weather preparedness. "So much for my reputation as an outdoorsman," David said, wringing out his shirt. "I think your reputation is safe," I said, trying to squeeze water out of my hair. We stood under the pavilion, watching the rain come down in sheets, listening to thunder roll across the hill country. There was something magical about being caught in the storm together. Something that felt like an adventure rather than an inconvenience. "Sarah," David said quietly, and something in his voice made me turn to look at him. "Yeah?" "I know this is complicated because of Michael, but I need you to know that I care about you. Not as my ex-sister-in-law or as someone I feel sorry for. As you. As Sarah. The rain continued to fall around us, creating a curtain of privacy in the middle of the city. I looked at this man who had somehow become so important to me without my realizing it. This man who saw me as a complete person, rather than a collection of wife-shaped expectations. "I care about you too," I said softly. He stepped closer, close enough that I could see water droplets on his eyelashes, close enough to count the freckles across his nose that I'd never noticed before. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, and the question was so honest and direct that it took my breath away. I nodded, and when his lips met mine, it felt like coming home to a place I'd never been before. The kiss was gentle and sure, and completely different from anything I'd experienced with Michael. With Michael, even our most passionate moments had felt like performances, like we were both trying to live up to some idea of what married couples should do. With David there was no performance, no agenda, just the simple truth of two people who cared about each other. When we broke apart, David rested his forehead against mine. "I've wanted to do that for a very long time," he admitted. "How long?" I asked, curious despite myself. He smiled ruefully. "Since Michael brought you home for Christmas during your senior year of college. You were wearing this red sweater, and you helped my mom in the kitchen even though she was being her usual controlling self. And you laughed at my terrible jokes during dinner. I thought Michael was the luckiest man in the world. The revelation stunned me. You never said anything. You were my brother's girlfriend, then his fiancée, then his wife. Of course I never said anything." David's thumb traced my cheek gently. "But you're not his wife anymore. That night changed everything between us." We stopped pretending that we were just friends, navigating an awkward social situation. We acknowledged what had been building between us for months, what had probably always been there in some form. Our relationship developed slowly, carefully. David was respectful of my need to process the end of my marriage, patient with my occasional moments of guilt about dating his brother's ex-wife. He never pushed for more than I was ready to give, never made me feel like I owed him anything beyond honesty about my feelings. For the first time in years, I felt genuinely happy. Not the performance of happiness I'd maintained during my marriage, but actual joy in small everyday moments. Waking up looking forward to the day ahead. Laughing until my stomach hurt. Feeling curious about the future instead of anxious about meeting expectations. David taught me that love could be easy and natural rather than work and obligation. He supported my teaching career not because he thought it was cute that I had a little job, but because he understood how much it meant to me. He encouraged my painting, even setting up a proper easel in his studio space so I could work when I spent time there. He introduced me to new music and books and ideas, not to improve me but because he enjoyed sharing things he loved with someone he cared about. In September, David left for a 3-week assignment photographing a destination wedding in Greece. We'd been together for 4 months by then, officially dating for 2, and I missed him more than I'd expected. We talked every day, video calls that stretched late into the night despite the time difference. But it wasn't the same as having him there. The night he returned, exhausted from traveling and jet-lagged but happy to be home, we went back to his studio apartment. It was cluttered with camera equipment and prints from his latest projects, walls covered with photographs from around the world. Somehow it felt more like home than the perfectly appointed house in Westlake Hills had ever felt. We were sitting on his couch, my feet in his lap, while he told me about the wedding he'd shot on a cliff overlooking the Aegean Sea, when something shifted between us. Maybe it was the time apart, or maybe it was simply that we'd reached a point where pretending we didn't want more became impossible. "Sarah," he said softly, his hand stilling on my ankle. I met his eyes and saw my own feelings reflected back at me. Love and desire and the kind of connection that goes deeper than physical attraction. "Are you sure?" he asked. Because David always made sure I had the choice to say no. Instead of answering with words, I moved closer to him on the couch, close enough to kiss him properly. This time there was no rainstorm as an excuse, no moment of temporary madness to blame it on. This was a choice we were both making with full awareness of what it meant. What happened next was nothing like the careful, scheduled intimacy of my marriage. With David, there was no pressure to perform or achieve specific outcomes. There was just us, learning each other, taking time to explore and discover what brought pleasure and joy. He made me feel beautiful and desired in ways I'd never experienced. Ways that had nothing to do with my potential for producing children, and everything to do with who I was as a woman and a person. Afterwards, lying in his bed with Austin spreading out below us through the large windows, I felt a peace I hadn't known I was capable of feeling. David's arm was around me, his breathing deep and even as he dozed, and I allowed myself to imagine a future that looked nothing like the one I'd planned with Michael, but felt infinitely more real and possible. That was the night our child was conceived, though neither of us knew it at the time. That was the night that would eventually bring my carefully rebuilt world crashing down around me in the most unexpected way, forcing me to make choices I never imagined I'd have to make. But in that moment, curled up against David's warm chest with the Texas stars visible through his windows, I was simply happy. Finally, genuinely, completely happy. I had no idea that across town, Michael was already planning his next move, already courting the woman who would become his second wife within months of our divorce being final. I had no idea that Patricia Mitchell was keeping careful track of my activities through mutual friends and social media, watching for any sign that I was moving on in ways that might reflect poorly on her precious son. I had no idea that in just a few weeks I would discover something that would change everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my divorce, and the reason I'd never been able to give Michael the children he claimed to want so desperately. All I knew was that for the first time in years I felt like myself again, Sarah Williams, not defined by what she couldn't do or who she'd failed to become, but valued for exactly who she was. It was enough. In that moment, it was everything. October arrived in Austin with the kind of crisp mornings that reminded you why people endured the brutal summers. I was standing at my bathroom sink, brushing my teeth before school, when the wave of nausea hit me so suddenly that I barely made it to the toilet in time. The dry heaves left me shaking and confused, sitting on my bathroom floor in my teaching clothes, wondering what I could have eaten that would make me so sick. For 3 days, I attributed the morning sickness to stress. The school year was in full swing, and I was juggling lesson plans for 26 third graders while trying to prepare for parent conferences. David had just left for a 10-day assignment photographing a resort opening in Costa Rica, and I missed him more than seemed reasonable for someone who prided herself on independence. Emma noticed first, the way only your closest friend can notice the subtle changes that you're too close to see yourself. We were having our usual Thursday evening dinner at her apartment, takeout Thai food spread across her kitchen table, when she looked up from her pad CU and studied my face with the clinical attention that made her such a good nurse. "When was your last period?" she asked without preamble. I paused with my chopsticks halfway to my mouth. What kind of question is that? The kind your medically trained best friend asks when you've been picking at your food for 20 minutes and you look like you're about to throw up. Emma set down her chopsticks and leaned back in her chair. Also, you haven't had a single sip of that wine I opened, and you never turned down a good Pinot Grigio. I looked down at the untouched glass beside my plate and realized she was right. The smell of the wine had seemed overwhelming when she'd poured it, though I hadn't consciously registered why I wasn't drinking it. "I don't know," I said honestly, trying to remember. "Maybe 3 weeks? 4? I haven't been tracking it since the divorce." Emma's expression shifted into what I recognized as her professional mode. "Sarah, honey, when did you and David first sleep together?" Heat flooded my face despite the fact that Emma and I had shared details about our love lives since college. "About 6 weeks ago." "Have you been using protection?" The question hung between us like a challenge I wasn't ready to face. David and I had talked about birth control in the abstract way that responsible adults do, but in the heat of the moment, overwhelmed by emotion and desire and the simple joy of being with someone who made me feel beautiful, we'd been careless. Not completely reckless, but not as careful as we should have been. "Mostly," I said weakly. Emma was already reaching for her purse. "Come on, where are we going?" "CVS. We're getting you a pregnancy test. Actually, we're getting you 3 pregnancy tests, because you're gonna want to be absolutely sure." The drive to the pharmacy felt surreal. For 3 years, I'd bought pregnancy tests with a mixture of hope and dread, month after month of negative results that felt like personal failures. Now sitting in Emma's passenger seat while she navigated Austin traffic with the determination of a woman on a mission, I felt something entirely different. Not hope exactly, but not dread either. something closer to disbelief, as if my body had played a cosmic joke on me. Emma marched through the pharmacy like she was conducting a military operation, grabbing 3 different brands of pregnancy tests and a bottle of water. At the checkout counter, the teenage cashier avoided eye contact in the way that suggested this wasn't his first time ringing up pregnancy tests for nervous-looking women. Back at Emma's apartment, I stared at the 3 boxes lined up on her bathroom counter like they contained my future. Which, I supposed, they did. "Do you want me to stay or give you privacy?" Emma asked. "Stay," I said quickly. "I don't think I can do this alone." The next 5 minutes felt like the longest of my life. I followed the instructions on all 3 tests, then sat on Emma's bathroom floor counting down the minutes, while she rubbed my back and murmured reassurances that everything would be okay no matter what the results showed. When the timer on her phone went off, I couldn't bring myself to look. Emma picked up each test one by one, her expression remaining carefully neutral until she'd examined all 3. "Well?" I asked, though my voice came out as barely a whisper. "Congratulations," Emma said softly. "You're pregnant." The words hit me like a physical force. Pregnant. After 3 years of negative tests, of doctors telling me that conception was unlikely without medical intervention, of Michael divorcing me specifically because I couldn't get pregnant, I was actually pregnant. "All 3?" I asked because some part of my brain refused to accept what Emma was telling me. "All 3. Clear as day." Emma sat down on the bathroom floor beside me, still holding the tests. "How do you feel?" How did I feel? Shocked, certainly. Terrified, absolutely. But underneath those expected emotions was something I hadn't anticipated: joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy at the thought of carrying David's child, of becoming a mother with a man who would love our baby not as a trophy or achievement, but as a person worthy of love simply for existing. "I feel happy," I said, surprised by my own response. "I feel really, really happy." Emma smiled and pulled me into a hug. "Good, because you're going to be an amazing mother." "I need to call David," I said, reaching for my phone before remembering he was in Costa Rica, probably fast asleep given the time difference. "You can call him tomorrow," Emma said gently. "Tonight, let's just sit with this news. Let yourself feel whatever you're feeling without worrying about anyone else's reaction." So we sat on our bathroom floor eating ice cream straight from the container and talking about cribs and baby names and how I was going to tell my students when I started showing. It felt like the kind of evening I dreamed about during all those months of failed attempts with Michael. The kind of celebration I'd imagined having when I finally got the positive test I'd wanted so desperately. The difference was that this time, I wasn't thinking about how to present the news to make someone else happy. I wasn't calculating due dates against Michael's work schedule, or worrying about whether the timing would be convenient for his family's expectations. I was simply excited about having a baby with the man I loved, a baby who would be wanted and cherished, regardless of gender or temperament or any of the other criteria I'd never realized I'd been unconsciously applying. The next morning, I called David from my classroom during my planning period. He answered on the second ring, his voice thick with sleep and tinged with concern. "Sarah? Is everything okay?" "It's early there." "Everything's fine," I said, then took a deep breath. "Actually, everything's wonderful." "David, I'm pregnant." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that I started to worry the call had dropped. "David, are you there?" "I'm here," he said finally, and his voice sounded strange. "Pregnant? You're sure?" 3 tests yesterday, blood work this morning to confirm I'm pregnant." Another long pause, and then David let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Sarah, that's incredible. I mean, if you're happy about it, I'm happy about it. Are you happy about it?" "I'm very happy about it," I said, smiling despite the tears that had started flowing down my cheeks. "I know we haven't talked about this, and I know the timing isn't ideal with you traveling so much, but I want this baby, David. I want our baby." "I want it too," David said immediately. God, Sarah, I love you. I love you, and I already love this baby, and I can't wait to come home to you. We talked for another 20 minutes, David asking questions about how I was feeling and when the baby was due, and whether I'd told anyone else yet. His excitement was infectious and genuine, so different from the careful calculations and strategic planning that Michael would have applied to the situation. I'll be home in 5 days, David said as we were wrapping up the call. We'll figure everything out then. We'll make plans and talk about the future and celebrate properly. I love you, I told him, meaning it more than I'd ever meant anything in my life. I love you too. Both of you. After we hung up, I sat in my empty classroom surrounded by motivational posters and student artwork, my hand resting on my still flat stomach, and felt a contentment I'd never experienced before. For the first time in my adult life, I was exactly where I wanted to be, with exactly the person I wanted to be with, building exactly the kind of future I'd dreamed of. I should have known it wouldn't last. Dr. Lisa Park had been my obstetrician during my marriage to Michael, the doctor who'd conducted test after test trying to determine why I couldn't conceive. She was a small woman in her 50s with prematurely gray hair and the kind of calm competence that made nervous patients feel instantly better. I'd chosen to return to her practice for my prenatal care because she knew my medical history, and because I trusted her professional judgment. What I hadn't expected was the expression of complete bewilderment on her face when she reviewed my file during my first appointment. Sarah, Dr. Park said slowly, looking up from her computer screen, I'm looking at your previous test results, and I have to ask you something that might sound strange. I shifted on the examination table, the paper crinkling beneath me. Okay, during your marriage you underwent extensive fertility testing, blood work, hormone panels, imaging studies. All of those tests came back normal. Your hormone levels were excellent. Your reproductive system showed no abnormalities, and there was no medical reason why you shouldn't have been able to conceive naturally. I stared at her, processing what she was saying. But Michael said the doctors told him I had fertility issues. Dr. Park frowned, clicking through screens on her computer. I don't see any documentation of that in your file. In fact, my notes from your last appointment indicate that I recommended both you and your husband undergo additional testing to identify potential male factor infertility. The room felt like it was tilting. Male factor infertility? In cases where a couple has been trying to conceive for over a year without success, roughly 40% of the time the issue is related to male fertility factors. Sperm count, motility, morphology. It's standard to test both partners. Dr. Park's expression grew more concerned. Sarah, did Michael ever complete those tests? I tried to remember the conversations we'd had about fertility testing, but they all blurred together in a haze of medical terminology and mounting frustration. Michael had always taken charge of communicating with doctors, said he wanted to spare me the stress of dealing with medical bureaucracy. I'd been grateful for his support, never thinking to question whether I was getting complete information. I don't know, I admitted. He handled most of the communication with your office. Dr. Park was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her choosing her words carefully. Sarah, I want to be very clear about something. Based on your medical history and the testing we completed, there was never any indication that you had fertility problems. If someone told you otherwise, they were either misinformed or deliberately misleading you. The words hit me like a physical blow. Deliberately misleading. For 3 years, I'd blamed my body for failing to do what it was designed to do. I'd changed my diet, taken supplements, tracked my cycles obsessively, endured the weight of Michael's disappointment, and Patricia's barely concealed disdain, all because I believed I was broken. Why would someone lie about that? I asked, though even as the words left my mouth, I was beginning to understand. Dr. Park's expression was gentle but serious. I can't speculate about other people's motivations, but I can tell you that your current pregnancy proves definitively that you never had fertility issues. I left Dr. Park's office in a daze, her words echoing in my head as I drove through Austin's afternoon traffic. Never had fertility issues. The tests were normal. Deliberately misleading. The pieces of a puzzle I hadn't even known existed were starting to arrange themselves into a picture I didn't want to see. That evening, I called Emma and asked her to come over. I needed someone with medical knowledge to help me understand what Dr. Park had told me. to help me figure out what it all meant. Emma arrived with a bottle of wine for herself and sparkling cider for me, taking one look at my face and immediately shifting into protective mode. What happened at the doctor's appointment? I told her everything Dr. Park had said, watching Emma's expression grow darker with each detail. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, her wine glass forgotten on my coffee table. "That son of a bitch," she said finally. "You think Michael lied to me?" "Sarah, honey, I think Michael did more than lie to you. I think he orchestrated an elaborate deception to make you believe you were the problem, so he could divorce you without looking like the villain." Emma's voice was tight with anger. "Think about it. If he'd just said he wanted out of the marriage, he would have looked like a jerk who abandoned his wife for no good reason. But if he could make it seem like you were the one who couldn't fulfill your wifely duty of producing children, then suddenly he's the long-suffering husband who tried everything but finally had to make a difficult choice." The logic was so cold and calculated that it took my breath away. But why go through all that trouble? Why not just ask for a divorce? Because Michael cares more about his reputation than anything else. He couldn't risk looking like the bad guy, especially to his family and social circle. This way, he gets to be the victim who was denied the family he always wanted. I thought about Patricia's comments during the divorce proceedings. The way she'd spoken about my situation with a mixture of pity and disdain. The way Michael's friends had looked at me with sympathy, tinged with judgment, as if my inability to conceive was a personal failing rather than a medical condition. "There's something else," Emma said carefully. Something I probably should have mentioned before, but I wasn't sure if it was relevant. "What?" "Remember when Michael said he needed those additional male fertility tests? The ones Dr. Park recommended?" I nodded, though the memory was vague. "I work at the same hospital system. I have access to lab records." Emma looked uncomfortable. "I may have looked up his results after your divorce." "Emma, you could get in trouble for that. I was worried about you, and I had a feeling something wasn't right about the whole situation." Emma met my eyes. "Sarah, Michael's sperm count was severely low. Like, so low that natural conception would have been nearly impossible without medical intervention." The room went silent except for the hum of my air conditioning. I stared at Emma, trying to process what she was telling me. "He knew," I said quietly. "He knew he was the reason we couldn't get pregnant, and he let me believe it was my fault for 3 years." "Worse than that," Emma said grimly. "He actively worked to convince you it was your fault so he could leave the marriage without taking responsibility for his own medical issues." I felt sick, but not from morning sickness this time. This was the deep, churning nausea that comes from realizing you've been systematically betrayed by someone you trusted completely. Every conversation about fertility treatments, every month of disappointment, every moment of self-blame had been based on a lie. "What kind of person does that?" I asked, though I wasn't really expecting an answer. "The kind of person who sees other people as props in his own story, rather than human beings with feelings," Emma said. "The kind of person who would rather destroy someone else's self-worth than admit to his own shortcomings." I spent the next few days in a strange emotional limbo, trying to reconcile the Michael I'd thought I knew with the Michael who was capable of such elaborate deception. I found myself remembering conversations and interactions from our marriage with new understanding, seeing patterns of manipulation and control that I'd been too trusting to recognize at the time. When David returned from Costa Rica, tanned and tired and carrying a small stuffed sloth he'd bought for the baby, I told him everything. We sat on his couch while I explained Dr. Park's revelations and Emma's research, watching his expression shift from confusion to disbelief to rage. "He let you blame yourself for 3 years?" David's voice was dangerously quiet. "He divorced you because you couldn't have children, knowing the whole time that he was the one with fertility problems?" "Apparently." David stood up and began pacing around his small apartment, running his hands through his hair in a gesture I recognized as his way of processing intense emotion. "I knew Michael was selfish, but this is beyond selfish. This is cruel. This is psychological abuse. I keep thinking about all the things I did," I said, my voice small. "All the supplements and diet changes and stress management techniques. All the appointments and tests and procedures I put myself through. All of it was pointless because he knew the whole time that I wasn't the problem." David stopped pacing and knelt in front of me, taking my hands in his. Sarah, listen to me. None of this is your fault. None of it. Michael is a manipulative coward who is willing to destroy your self-worth to protect his own ego. I just feel so stupid for believing him. You're not stupid. You trusted your husband to tell you the truth about something that affected both of your lives. That's what people in healthy relationships do. David's thumbs traced over my knuckles. The fact that he violated that trust says everything about his character and nothing about yours. As the shock of the revelation began to wear off, it was replaced by something else. Anger. Pure, burning anger at the 3 years of my life that had been stolen from me. At the damage to my self-esteem that I was still working to repair. At the audacity of a man who could destroy someone's sense of self to protect his own reputation. What are we going to do? David asked gently. I looked at him, this man who had shown me what love actually looked like. This man who was excited about our unplanned pregnancy, rather than seeing it as an inconvenience or failure of planning. We're going to live our lives, I said. We're going to have this baby and be happy together and build the kind of family that's based on honesty and love instead of lies and manipulation. And Michael? I considered this. Part of me wanted to confront him. To force him to admit what he'd done and face the consequences of his deception. But a larger part of me just wanted to be free of him entirely. To focus on my future rather than relitigating my past. Michael made his choice when he decided to lie to me for 3 years, I said finally. Now I get to make mine. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.